Welcome to the Believe in USC podcast. It is Thursday, October 3rd. It is Minnesota week as the Trojans are 3-1 and on their way to the Midwest to take on the Golden Gophers. He is Terrell Thomas, USC great defensive back. I'm Cooper Perkins. Thanks for spending some time with us. T, how you doing, man? What'd you think of last week? Just quick reactions. Where we at?
Coop, man, it's always great to see you. Pleasure having it on. I love where we're at as a team. I thought this was a statement game. They came out a little shaky in the first half. Obviously, the much punt return set everything off, but resilient in the second half, man. That's a championship characteristic right there.
I love that championship characteristic. We'll peel that back a little bit more in a minute. But first, I got to tell you guys about Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on the games. Think you know your stuff? We'll get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week. Trojans are favored by 8 right now, so make sure to get your pick in for that. For your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino, get in a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today and get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. All right, so getting back into the Wisconsin game, USC wins 38-21, trailed 21-10 at halftime. And Terrell, my first thought watching the game, as frustrating as that first half was you don't turn the ball over, and it's a totally different situation. You know, Wisconsin did not play well enough to be up 11 points without USC gifting them 3 turnovers. And, you know, we can get into how you fix the turnover trouble, what that looks like. But what's your assessment? Do you agree that, you know, those 3 turnovers are probably what makes the difference in that first half as opposed to holistically a slow start? Because they had 260 yards of offense, and, you know, outside of the one long touchdown, the defense is pretty good too.
Yeah, football is a week-to-week game. Obviously, we came out a little sluggish. This was Wisconsin's big opportunity to try to play Big Ten football, or at least play into the hype of the Coliseum and everything that's building around college football right now. But ultimately, these things happen. You know, we had some young players that made some questionable decisions, giving up a big play on defense. But when we settled down, we saw the true characteristic of our team. Which was controlling the time of possession and really pitching a shutout in the second half, which is stellar. And it wasn't a tough win. They had to fight and claw and be resilient and show some grit. So ultimately, we got the W, but I would definitely love for them to be a lot cleaner in the first half.
You mentioned the 28-0 second half. And it's interesting because D'Anton Lynn, both last year at UCLA and this year at SC, has developed this track record now that I think we can almost count on week in, week out of making tremendous halftime adjustments. When you're in the locker room, when you're huddled around, whether it's an iPad looking at film in real time, you know, you're looking at stats, whatever it is, what are those adjustments like? What is the process of making some changes like that look like? Because I'm so interested by D'Anton Lynn and the way that he's consistently been able to shift his game plan, shift his calls, shift what he's doing, and get the defense in the right positions. Take us behind the curtain and what making changes. Because when you were at SC, that's something that Pete coach teams did a great job of, really tremendous halftime adjustments. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, one is 2 parts. Sometimes you got to rip up the game plan, right? What we thought they were going to do, what we had planned is not working. We're going back to the basics. Other times it's just simply one person doing their job or making a slight adjustment and stunning the D lineman, bringing the safety inside instead of outside from a buzz to a sky. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Guy's just out of place, a little wacky, making a substitution. But ultimately, I think it speaks to 2 parts. One, great coaching staff, the ability to adjust to see what they're trying to do, what they're being successful at, and be able to have a game plan for that. And 2, the players being able to take that coaching, apply it, and execute it. And I think we've seen that in 4 games. Actually, 8 quarters. The last 8 quarters, we've been the better team. It came down to 1 play versus Michigan. But again, these are signs of a team that is buying into the coaching staff, to what they're preaching, and they're going out there and executing. That's all you can hope for.
And that defensive resume just seemingly gets better and better every week. I mean, that LSU win just keeps looking better. I know Joel Klatt had them in his playoff. He had USC in the playoff as well, if it started at the end of October, which is kind of cool to see. But looking at the Wisconsin game, you know, I talked on this show earlier this week. My kind of big feeling, though, is that I don't think at least I personally don't think I learned much that we didn't already know. Like, it felt like
Yeah.
The offensive line kind of gave us the same questions that we already had, maybe answered
Right.
one or two. Same kind of slow start. The defense is still good. The third down defense is still excellent. Third down offense is still good. I mean, do you take anything away from that game? Because, I look at it as close as I can, and like I can't think of anything new that we discovered.
Yeah, I think one thing you can kind of settle in on is Miller Moss, that he's consistent. He's going to be a quarterback that can deliver, that can take care of the ball. He's going to take his opportunities when he can. And more importantly, the biggest takeaway is what I told you last week, man. He needed a safety blanket. With Cam being out right now, we needed one of our young receivers to step up. And man, did Jacoby Lane look good out there? He is just flashing over the last 3 games. He had a stellar game. That sideline catch was amazing. Just throwing the ball up and being a big time play wide receiver and going to get it. I'm excited about his future. Obviously, we still got some young boys that can get going with Deuce Robinson, and Zachary has kind of been a little inconsistent. Seemed like he was a little overzealous, wanting to make the big plays versus just waiting for the opportunities to come to him. But my biggest takeaway was that we have a safety blanket. We have one of our young guns stepping up at wide receiver.
I want to talk more about him in a sec, but I want to circle back just briefly to Zach Branch. We had a conversation, myself and Luca Evans from Southern California News Group, on this show earlier this week about Zach Branch. And the thought kind of being that the responsibility for him getting open at this point is more on Lincoln Riley than it is on him. He's not really a physical mismatch in the way that Jacoby Lane and Deuce Robinson are
Yeah.
capable of being. He reminds you of those Oklahoma wide receivers that Lincoln consistently schemed open with drag routes, and you'll use that underneath game to get into space. I'm interested. What's your take on Zachariah Branch? You're a defensive back, right? You've had to square up against guys like that and figure out how to cover all different kinds of receivers.
Yeah.
From a DB's point of view, like, how do you describe Zachariah Branch? What do you take away from watching his game so far this year?
Well, one, he's very dynamic, to say the least. Obviously, he's an explosive player. He's fast, he's shifty, strong. So, as a nickel back, that's extremely hard to guard when they have multiple ways to get out of their routes and whatnot. But I think you hit the head on the nose, right? Let's put this on Lincoln and let's have him figure out, how do we get this guy the ball in space? And we haven't seen that. We've seen routes, we've seen concepts, but we haven't seen the big plays, the trickery that will come in the course of time. But ultimately, I think that's the best way to utilize him. And let's be honest, man, he was a freshman All-American. He probably has all this pressure on him that he wants to be the best time, the best next big wide receiver at USC. He is wearing number 1. Mike Williams is in the building. We don't give that number out, so easily. So let's take it easy on the kid. It's a long season, but ultimately, I think it falls on the coach being able to get him the ball in situations so he can make plays.
It feels like, as well, once he has one pop, that confidence is just going to come flooding back. It's almost like a hitter in baseball. Just needs to see the ball drop, and once it does, going to start feeling more comfortable. And I also think they put him in positions that are really tough for him. I mean, the interception that Miller threw this last week was basically a jump ball to your shortest receiver. Like, that's a tough spot for that guy to be in. You love to have him knock it down or do something, but at the end of the day, coaching is a factor here too. It's not all on the guys to get themselves open. There's a scheme component to it. But looking at Jacoby Lane, I want to apply the same kind of question to you that we just looked at with Zach Branch. Very different player, 6'4", elite ball skills, strong hands. Yeah. I mean, how do you even think about approaching a receiver like that?
Be physical. He's not the biggest kid. He has a lot of confidence, which I love. I love a kid that believes in himself and is relishing for those opportunities. So he's definitely shown that. But the biggest thing you can do is be physical, play top shoulder, and hopefully the quarterback makes a bad throw, because a good throw would always be perfect coverage. And with big wide receivers like that, man, you just throw the ball up and let them be special. You think of the greats that we've had, from Dwayne Jarrett to the Patrick Turners to obviously big Mike Williams. Let's not make this difficult. So let's continue to feed the young bull and get him going.
Yeah, and you describe him perfectly as kind of the safety blanket. And like, there are two components to being a safety blanket, right? It's being sure-handed, but it's also having a great sense of spatial awareness. Yeah. And like, I feel like he really illustrated that, understanding early in the game, one, I'm going to get hit, I'm going to get hit hard and I got to hang on to the football. And then later in the game on that third down play on the sideline, understanding where he is physically with relation to the sideline, to the pass, to where he needs to be in bounds. How much of that is, natural as opposed to learned? Because you look at his footwork on the sideline. They had a couple of great views on the television broadcast that I thought really did a good job showing just how impressive, that was. But how much of that is natural versus coaching?
It's a mixture of both, to be honest with you. Obviously, some of these athletes are just God-given talent. They've always been good and they put the work in. But a lot of it plays into coaching and trusting that coaching. And the instance in the games where it comes down to set your feet and catch the ball first, right? And that's exactly what he did. And his knee was almost out, but he gave quarterback an opportunity, and he made a big play. And the biggest thing I love, what I see, is that they're having a little continuity. He's a big play wide receiver. Miller's going to him and key situations and entrusting him, and he's making these plays. And obviously his smile, his energy is contagious, man. I think he's brings a good energy to our offense. He builds around some of the star talent that we have out of the backfield and in our receiver corps as a whole.
Kind of has that, it's a little bit cliche at this point, kind of has that alpha male thing about him a little bit,
Yeah,
like you hit me hard, I got the smile on my face. But it's fun to see. Like, you need that in any kind of team sport environment. You need that, especially in football. So that you're right. That is one thing that we did learn from the Wisconsin game, that we may in fact have a number one receiver. And that's going to be really important with the games coming up, right? You have Minnesota this week and then Penn State next week. I don't think that this is going to apply, but you have to always consider it, like spots in college football. They matter more than the NFL, where who you got next week as opposed to who you got this week, what it looks like. I'm sure these guys are going to hear about it all week long, and how, the focus has to be on Minnesota. But how hard is it to stay focused when you got a game like Penn State the next week? When you're going to have the national eyes on, you got a chance to make the statement that you didn't make against Michigan, right? Like, you want to make that statement and you have a chance to, but you have work to do right now first. What's that like? How do you navigate that?
It's almost like driving a car, right? You have to drive for others, but you also have a destination you have to get to first. Penn State's in the rear view. But we're heading to Minnesota, and that's what we have to focus on. Great coaches do a good job of getting their guys to buy into that, to making them see the greatness in this team and what they offer. And if we don't stop this can be a really close game. But I look at it, man. Vegas is never wrong, right? It's 8 points. It's on the road. It's the third Big Ten matchup in a row. They're going to try to pound the ball and see if we can handle it. So I'm excited to see how our team responds. Are we going to go out there and dominate, be physical, and can we handle this Big Ten football, which is everyone's question, right?
This Minnesota game is interesting. We'll start to get in it now. I don't know what to make of them. They're 3-2. They're 0-2 in the Big Ten. They've got bad losses to North Carolina and Iowa. I don't know how anyone loses to North Carolina the way they're playing. And then wins over Rhode Island and Nevada, both of whom are bottom of the barrel as far as, quality of competition goes. But then last week kind of changes the calculus a little bit. They go to the Big House, similar to USC, struggle in the first half against Michigan, but in the second half, really put pressure on the Wolverines and came within what was a pretty bad call on an onside kick at the end of the game away from getting the ball back with a chance to tie or win. I don't know how to make sense of this. I haven't watched a whole lot of Minnesota football, admittedly. I don't know if you have. I'm not sure that that's high on your list of things, really following the Golden Gophers. But this is just such a weird game. It's the 8-point line against a 2-3 team, but they played pretty well a week ago against a team that you just saw and just you really have a clear idea of what it's like. It's a reminder, I think, that in football, like the law of transitive properties doesn't apply. You can't say that, well, they beat them and they lost to them and they lost by this much to them, so therefore we're this many. That never works, But when you try and figure things out, like, I don't know what to make of Minnesota, man. They got a quarterback that's played pretty well. They got a coach who's been trying to leave the job for the last 3 years. They got a defense that has great numbers, but hasn't really played an offense that can move the football. I mean, they played a North Carolina team with a quarterback with a busted leg. They played Rhode Island and Nevada, two teams that can't move the ball. They played Iowa, who's consistently had one of the worst offenses in college football year over year. And then they played Michigan, who we know can't throw the ball. So, I don't know what to make of Minnesota. It's this weird game going in where it's just kind of throw your hands up and say, what do we even do here?
Yeah, it could be a trap game. I don't think it has the hype of a trap game, but it has a lot of characteristics. You know, you talk about a team being resilient versus Michigan in the second half and coming down to a questionable call. And we're the Super Bowl. You know, we're USC. We're coming to the Big Ten. Everyone wants to make their mark. They're going to come out firing, and I want to see how our team responds. Ultimately, the characteristics of a championship team. That's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about, can this team be another USC great team, get to the college playoffs? It's how you play against opponents who are lesser than you. Do you play down to their competition, or do you dominate them and treat them like your little brother? So we're going to see what our team is made out of. In regards to Minnesota, you got to take everyone, seriously. This is college football. They do work out, and now they get paid just like we do. And ultimately, we were one half away from losing to Wisconsin. Excuse me. They dominated. We had an efficient first half in our offense, but we were down in score, turnovers, situations. So you can never take any game for granted, especially when you're trying to get into the college playoff system.
Circling back to that Wisconsin game, I think I'm pretty quick to excuse most of the mistakes that were made because of inexperience. I think the offensive line, you look at the strip sack, you look at some of the struggles the offensive line had. Same thing we were saying a week ago. I think inexperience is a big part of it. Miller Moss played great, still only started 5 games. At what point do we stop bringing up inexperience and youth? Like, at what point in the season does it start to become, they're not inexperienced anymore? Like, they have some time under their belt. We can expect things of them, as opposed to not making excuses, but maybe being charitable with our analysis and the way we look at things.
Yeah, I think it's just being fair to understand that this is a young team, and these are some of the growing pains we're going to have, where you're going to have MEs, you're going to have guys out of gaps, you're going to have guys getting beat on plays they probably shouldn't get beat. Ultimately, when I look at it, man, we're time of possession, we're winning every team that we play against, but it's a turnover battle. We're -1 right now. We're losing that. I know Lynn is a very aggressive coach, but we got to be a little bit more optimistic when the ball's in the air, punching the ball out. That would help a young offense, get them some more touches, get them going, get the momentum going, take the pressure off of them. When you talk about winning football games, it's always time of possessions and the turnover battle. We lost the first half versus Wisconsin because of the turnover battle. We held on to the ball second half. We dominate them. Sometimes it's just that simple. And with a young team, it's teaching them the nuances of how to win football games consistently, and it's the details in your craft.
The turnovers are so interesting because, I think that we learned 2 years ago in the first season of Lincoln Riley that there is a reasonable amount of luck involved in the turnover battle.
No doubt.
Right. The defense forced a ton of turnovers, and that covered up for a lot of problems. Last year, they didn't force a lot of turnovers, and it exposed a lot of problems. Do you have to pick between prioritizing like 3rd and 4th down discipline and sticking to a 3rd and 4th down plan over trying to force takeaways? How do you balance that mentally? Like, if you're Danton Lynn, like, what is your message? Because obviously you want them to, find a way to get in the passing lane or punch the ball out, but it's not usually that simple, right? Like, offenses are also designed to protect the ball to some extent.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that? How do you think that he's approaching that conversation right now, through Thursday, moving into Friday?
It's habits. It's starting Monday. It's always speaking about the turnover battle. It's about just at the ball. We used to count them when I was there. If we didn't hit a certain amount, we had to run. Or there was bets on the lines between different groups. D-line would lose to the DBs or linebackers. You got to make it competitive and fun. It's tedious to say the least, but those habits build great efforts and characteristics on. And I keep saying characteristics. That's just the word of the day, I guess. But it builds a championship caliber defense over the course of time, because no coordinator says, hey, I'm going to call this call to get a turnover. It doesn't work that way. It's players being in position, doing their job. And when it's the opportunity presents itself, the running back is carrying it loose, you can punch at it as you're making a tackle, or the ball's in the air as a DB, you can attack it. These are opportunities that we have to take advantage of. And ultimately, we got to get guys who are more confident in the scheme and more confident in their play, and therefore we'll start dominating opponents. And we haven't seen that for 4 quarters. I'm waiting to see that. Hopefully this can be a game, but ultimately it falls on the players and it falls on the coaches implementing those habits throughout the week.
I think the Wisconsin game as well, right? There were a couple of significant absences on defense. Eric Gentry missing some time is a loss always. Noah Achille Arnold. Um, I think that as they move forward, right, if this team can get and stay healthy, that collective cohesive unit will probably be more comfortable taking some chances as opposed to, making the simple play. I think there's probably going to be a little bit of PTSD about wrapping up and tackling as opposed to punching the ball out after the Michigan game, right? But at
Yeah,
a certain point, that fades. One area of concern, though, and I think probably the only real area of concern defensively, though, is the pass rush.
yeah,
No sacks against Wisconsin. It didn't really matter a whole lot. But just on the eye test, it seems as though the defense struggles to get pressure on the quarterback without bringing extra bodies.
yeah,
And I don't know how you solve that. I don't know how you fix that because no one's walking through the door tomorrow as a pass rushing specialist that already isn't on the roster.
yeah.
And that hasn't mattered a whole lot because you played Michigan, who can't throw the ball. You played Wisconsin team with a young quarterback who was inexperienced and got rattled on his own a little bit. But pretty quick here, we're going to get into Penn State. We're going to get into some of these games, Notre Dame, quarterbacks that are experienced that you need to pressure. How worried are you about that? And what's your takeaway about the pass rush? Because on one hand, you'd like to see them get pressure with 4, but they are getting pressure with 5 or 6. Yeah, it's not to say they're never getting pressure. It's just not coming as easily as you'd probably like it to.
Yeah, it's a false stat to say the least. Sometimes you want to see the sacks, but we're not counting the hurries or the pressures or where we're forcing the ball to. Why we're so good on third downs because we have guys that are doing their job. They're containing, they're forcing the quarterback to step up, to throw the check down. We're tackling it. All right, here comes the punt return. Some of those things are kind of overlooked, and it could be the scheme. It could be the scheme to say, hey, man, we're going to be more aggressive when we're blitzing, when we're sitting 5 versus 4. Obviously, you want to create as much pressure with a 4-man rush, but so many things play into why we're not getting pressure. I don't think it's anything to panic on right now. We don't need to be a team that creates sacks. We need a team that is able to be disciplined, to stay in our gap, that can tackle well, that can be opportunistic when turnovers present themselves. And more importantly, we start winning the turnover battle.
All right, so we're going to pivot here. Terrell's got an awesome hat on today, and that's where we're going with this one because we got to talk a little bit about melon hats. Maybe the most important part of an outfit. Depends on where you're going, depends on time of day. It depends on what your girlfriend thinks, but it is an excellent hat, strongest hat, built to last 5 times longer than other hats. If you're looking for a hat, maybe you're a tough guy, think about a tough hat for you. But if you're looking for the world's most durable hat, look no further. Go to melon.com. That's MELIN.com and put it to the test yourself. Terrell, I'm going to steal a little bit of a segment that the Wisconsin guys have going on. They had me on last week, and I thought it was a good idea. In honor of the melon hats, we're going to call it Hang Your Hat. So 4 games in, offensively, defensively, what is one thing on each side of the ball that, to your eyes, USC can hang its hat on?
Miller Moss on the offensive side, I thought he's been pretty consistent. And on the defensive side, I'm not going to call out a player because I haven't seen one player just step up. I love the way we're playing on third down and in the red zone. It's only had 9 opportunities for teams to get in there, 6 of the times they've scored. So I love that component. I'm a big stat guy. I love to see the details and how a defense or team is trying to win. So I'm going to hang my hat on Miller Moss and our defense on situational downs.
The situational downs are so big, right? Wisconsin went 2 for 11 on third downs last week. They had the massive 4th down stop, that 4th and 1. Yeah, and it's so
that's
refreshing.
A turnover. That's pressure, not to cut you off, but people forget about that. That is a turnover. We count those in-house. They don't count on the stat sheet, but that's a turnover.
That's a good point, because I think when you add, there have been a handful of key 4th down stops. You go back to the LSU game.
Yeah.
You look at the Michigan game. I think that you're really onto something there, that we do need to reframe the way we think about 4th down stops and how it fits into the turnover battle. It's so interesting to me because those critical downs have been when the defense has been at its weakest the last couple of years. And that leads me to think that while scheme is a big part of it, mentality has to be a massive component here,
Yeah.
because this defense looks entirely different from a mentality standpoint. And, yes, I think Danton Lynn clearly puts his players in better positions than Alex Grinch did. But, what do you make of such a massive improvement on the critical downs from one season to another? How do you shift that culture? Because it's almost like shifting a losing culture to a winning culture. You're
Yeah.
so used to seeing third down conversions, fourth down conversions. You get them in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. And it's almost like that's what the offense was scheming for. Get into 3rd and long, and the defense is going to break down.
Yeah.
This is just such a different defense. What do you make of that, cultural overhaul and that mentality change?
Well, one, the credit goes to the DC, D'Anton Lynn, man. He's doing an amazing job. You can also credit that to some of our players, right? The buy-in and the attention to detail. That's what it really is. It's being sound in all that you do, whether it's tackling or your fits, or when you're playing the buzz, or when you're the spill guy. If we have guys being selfish and not doing their job, in which we saw versus Michigan, that's how the big plays happen. And we still haven't stopped that as a defense, but we're getting better. And look at Kamari Ramsey, for example, right? Didn't have his best game versus Michigan. Came back the next week, was very physical. You saw him flying around. That's the characteristics of a guy who looked in the mirror and said, I have to do better. That's coming from the top down, to the players and as a whole team. So I'm excited about USC and their future. I want to see them continue to build week to week. But ultimately, everything we're doing right now is in line with what we thought we would be this off season.
When you look at it, every team that wins a championship has a handful of characteristics. They're not always the same. Some teams have different identities and kind of personalities than others. But, you were on championship winning teams. You know what it takes to win at this level. If you were going to put, 3 things out there that you think are like the basis of a championship culture, like what would they be? And does this team have them? Do they have 2 of them? Do they have all of them? How would you grade this team that we've seen so far, against the 2 or 3 things that are like essential to being a championship team?
Yeah, well, they have resiliency and grit. I'll give them that. They've haven't had the best start to games, and they found a way to finish. Ultimately, they've been a resilient team in every game, 2 out of 3, to say the least. I'm sorry, 3 out of the 4. Other than the Utah State, that's the only team they kind of really blew out. So that's one thing. I think the characteristics that you look for in a championship team is, one, you got to take care of the ball, whether it's turnovers or creating turnovers. You got to take care of the ball. 2, you got to be sound in a lot of the things you do. You got to have a base, whether you're a running team, you take shots and key opportunities. You're not creating turnovers, but you're great on 3rd down in situations. But lastly, you got to have guys that step up. At some point, it's not X's and O's, it's Larry's and Joe's. And we have that on offense. Jacoby Lane stepping up as a receiver. We got a good running game. We got a good quarterback. We have a lot of pieces there. On defense, we got a bunch of names, but I haven't seen one person step up. I haven't seen an All-American type of player, whether it's at the corner position, safety, linebacker, or D-line. And ultimately, to make a run and to win it this year, you're going to need at least 1 or 2 players on the defensive side that you can hang your hat on.
So at the 1/3 point in the season, right, you played 4 of 12 regular season games. What's your grade for this USC team so far?
That's a tough one, Coop. Honestly, I'm going to give them an A-. We should be 4-0. It came down to 1 play. It came down to 3 plays in the Michigan game. What I love about this team is that they're consistent week in and week out, and they're coachable. That's the biggest thing that I see. They're being coached well, and they're applying it. It's one thing to have great coaches and kids be out there and not listening and doing their own thing. It's another to see it in the second half consistently that they are adjusting and playing, great team ball. So I'm very optimistic about the season with USC. They got a couple of tests along the way. Obviously, this one being the first or second Big Ten road test, and then having Penn State come to our house should be a fun task. So I think at the 6-week mark, the halfway part, we'll know what type of team we have.
I think you're so right about the coaching being really good, blended with the coachable players, because going into this year, it just felt like based on all of his offseason behavior, the changes in the defensive staff, the changes to
Yeah.
philosophy, like this just felt like it was setting up to be kind of a Lincoln Riley revenge tour. And I think we saw it in week 1 with the LSU win, right? We saw things about it in the Michigan game. We saw it a little bit in the second half last week. And I think in the next 2 weeks, if this team executes, if this team plays well, the national narrative is going to start to shift on Lincoln Riley. He's been kind of forgotten about a little bit, on a national level. People for so long while he was at Oklahoma, raved about how he's one of the best young coaches in college football. And then really after one disappointing season at SC, the guy's been written off. And so it's interesting to see what this, course correction has looked like. And I'm curious to see how they play the next 2 weeks. Just like we were saying a little earlier, don't really know what to make of Minnesota. I know it's a game that USC needs to win. I know it's a game that they should win based on everything that we do know at this point, but I think we're going to have, I think it'll be an interesting statement the next 2 weeks of how much Lincoln has grown year over year, because we know he's changed, but how much has he grown? I think we're going to see a lot, which is interesting and exciting. If you're looking at this game, you're going into it, what's your pick? We're probably not picking against USC, but look at the point spread, 8 points. It opened at 9.5. To me, that number feels low. That feels small. I'm curious, how do you feel about that number and that spread right now?
Vegas is never wrong. I don't know how they do it, but Vegas is always up to something. It feels like a trap game. It feels like a game where we lost to Michigan. We responded well versus Wisconsin, and now we got to just take care of Minnesota and get ready for Penn State. I know everyone's ready for that. It's going to be a top 10 showdown. This is going to get us right back in the national talks, and it's going to take great character from our leaders to keep the team saddled in and just to focus on the task at hand. And I think if we do that, that line won't matter. We should definitely beat them by at least 17 points.
I tend to agree with you. I think that while Vegas is never wrong, they're often not as right as it looks. Like there's a very real possibility where this is a 2-touchdown game that's never all that close, but a late touchdown makes it a 7-point game, and all of a sudden Vegas is right. So to me, this doesn't feel as close as maybe the betting markets would suggest that is.
And it shouldn't be. I mean, hopefully we come out there and kick their butts, right? Let's see what this team is all about. Don't play down to your competition. Put the word on notice. Let Penn State know that when you come to the Collie, man, you're going to have to score 40 points to beat us. And our defense is good enough that if you're probably going to only give you like 21.
Right. And that's so fun. It's exciting because I think we're actually going to learn a lot this weekend that we didn't learn last weekend, right? We're going to get to know about the offensive line and see, okay, how concerned should we be going up against the elite pass rushers against Penn State next week? We're going to learn about the defense. Are we starting to turn the corner in the turnover battle? Are they still as consistent on 3rd and 4th downs? We're going to learn about Miller Moss more. It seems like he shows us something new every week. And this will be our final point for the show today. But, man, I just can't help but be happier and happier watching this kid play week over week because, man, he just gives it everything he has. Like that kid is just so fun to watch, not because he's dynamic, not because he makes jaw-dropping plays like Caleb Williams used to or other quarterbacks do in different places, but just because he's tough as hell mixed with smart as hell. And kind of cocky. Like he's got a little bit of an arrogance. That kid pulling out a spin move on the goal line on a read option on 4th, that crazy move to do that. But
he's old school, man. He's old school. He's all about the work ethic. He's all about being committed to something and not, jumping ship so fast. He had to wait 2 years behind a Heisman candidate. How many of these kids this day and age will leave and be out of there like they have a high school portal? So I think it's refreshing to see a guy be committed to something, to wait his turn and watch how life blesses you. And I love what he's doing for us. I love everything that he represents for the Trojan Nation. It warms my heart as a Trojan who Just, we bled Cardinal and gold when we were there. That's why we were so good. We played for one another. And I think he's really galvanizing that team and his efforts.
Yeah, I think Lincoln said it really well that, I'll show you a tough quarterback and I'll show you a tough team. And I think that that's proven true to this point and will probably continue to prove true. Now, pray to God that he stays healthy. I mean,
Yeah.
he's taken enough hits where that's a reasonable concern, but it's going to be a weekly segment. It feels like, just talking about how much fun it is and kind of how much of a joy it is to see Miller Moss wear Cardinal and gold, to see the way he represents the program, the school, everything the USC is about. And, as we said earlier before the season started, he is one of us, not just the guy playing football at USC. He is a Trojan through and through. And I get the sense that there are more and more of those guys on this team that are embodying kind of what that means. I think of like Gavin Meyer on the defensive line, the guy who transfers in from Wyoming in the last second and beats out Bear Alexander. Like that's Trojan. Like you look at Eric Gentry, the guy's starting to really, lean into that role, lean into that degree of maturity. So it's soft and silly to say, but it's kind of heartwarming to see that, this kind of spirit that's been laying dormant for like 10, almost 15 years is kind of starting to wake up. It's truly the sleeping giant. When you let the USC spirit come into the equation, that's when you're playing with fire. Don't let this team get comfortable. Don't let this team believe in itself and believe in each other.
Yeah, no doubt. It's good to see, man. Shout out to Mike Williams. I'm pretty sure he has a big part of that. Obviously, Taylor Mays is on that team as well. He's been on the staff, but it takes a village. So I'm just happy to see that as a coaching staff, as a culture, we're getting back to our old ways.
For sure, for sure. And for you this week, Sierra Canyon, who the Trailblazers have coming up?
We have Chaminade tomorrow.
Okay. So into Mission League play, so you got Chaminade, and is it Sarah the next week?
That's a great question.
I just
sometimes I just show up so I don't get fined. So forgive me for not knowing that.
I just saw Sarah last week against Los Alamitos, and I'll tell you what,
good.
Man, they beat the brakes off of them.
Yeah.
Those two defensive linemen, Kari Wilder's starting to get recruited pretty heavily by SC, which is fun to see. But that's a scary team. They got 5 guys in their defensive backfield with D1 offers, and they play just as good as the hype says. That'll be fun. But we'll check in with some Mission League football again next week. Terrell, awesome talking to you as always, man. You have a great weekend, and fight on, buddy.
Always, brother. Thanks for having me. Fight on.